Welcome to A Christian Response with me, Dave Piper, on TWR-UK. In this series, we're taking a look at how Christians are responding to some of the major issues in communities across the UK and around the world. We're finding out what motivates people to stand up for those in poverty, to tackle human trafficking, and to champion those in the latter years of their lives, amongst many other issues. We're speaking to church leaders, charity staff, experts and volunteers to get a grasp of the numerous problems in our communities that can be fixed by prayer, practical action and political intervention. We're taking lessons from Scripture about how we as followers of Christ should respond to those around us. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on anything you hear this week on the programme, then please do feel free to email us. The email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. We're joined this week on the series by Nigel Fawcett-Jones, Rapid Response Team Manager and Assistant Head of Ministry at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association UK. And we're talking today, Nigel, about a Christian response to disasters when they happen here in the UK. And people may well be aware that the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association sent people out to things such as the aftermath of 9/11 in America, for instance, and respond to disasters all over the world. But we're talking about the response here in the UK. And I wonder if you could just give us a bit of an inkling as to how and why rapid response teams were thought up of for the UK in the first place.
Sure. So following 9/11 that you just mentioned, Dave, there was a recognition by Franklin Graham, who now leads the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. There was a real need for emotional and spiritual support because the church leaders in New York particularly were overwhelmed by just the impact of those terror attacks in that tragic event. And the Billy Graham Prayer Centre opened at that event, and then following that, the decision was made that there needed to be some kind of training for everyday folks to be a support in times of crisis, 9/11 being sort of the initiator of that thought. And from that, the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team was birthed. And initially, it was all about training and the equipping of church members to support those going through challenging times. So it may be a crisis event like 9/11, or it could be bereavement or unemployment or marital issues or challenges with teenagers. So general equipping and encouraging of the church to have the confidence to support those people in times of need. So fast forward to 2004, 2005 hurricane season, and the decision was made to take some of those trained people out into the field to support communities that had been devastated by the challenging events that happen in hurricanes. And it was there in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina that I met the then director of the Rapid Response Team, Jack Mundy, and I said, how could we have something like this in the UK? There's the same need, there's crisis events taking place. How could we respond? And we started a conversation, and then in 2010, the team was formed in the UK. And that's a very short version of how the Rapid Response Team was birthed in the United Kingdom.
And we're aware from our news headlines of the sort of disasters and emergencies that rapid response teams might be called to in places that get hurricanes and cyclones and massive sea waves flooding in on their shores and all this sort of thing. What does the scene look like here in the UK? What sort of disasters and emergencies are we talking about here?
It's a really good question, Dave. We've responded to all sorts of incidents, stuff that makes the national headlines and stuff that really impacts the local community. Our first deployment was to West Cumbria. And if you remember the mass shootings that we had there in 2010, flooding events, some of the tragic events of 2017 in terrorism in Manchester and Westminster Bridge, Grenfell Tower fire, where perhaps some of the bigger headline stuff. But we also do a lot of work with stuff that's really impacted the local community. I think of an incident in Doncaster where a teenager was killed on the railway line. His friend was with him at the time and survived. And that really brought a challenge to the community. And a local church that was really active brought us alongside them into their response to the community. And we simply placed chaplains in the church environment where people came for mums and toddlers clubs and different youth groups and before and after school clubs, just to have conversations with people. So both ends of the spectrum, the big stuff that makes the national headlines and actually the local stuff that really impacts the community but never makes the national news.
And again, this is a side of the response that probably in and of itself doesn't often make national news either, isn't it? Because, yes, there's a great need in the aftermath of these events for immediate search and rescue, for security forces to make places safe, for the medium-longer term rebuilding physically of properties and infrastructure. But this is looking at the spiritual side, the emotional, the psychosocial side of things as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and the UK, I know when we've talked before, Dave, we've talked about Local Resilience Forum, which brings together the emergency services, Environment Agency, National Health, but also the voluntary and faith groups. And we see a lot of work taking place to take care of the practical side of things, visiting people in a time of crisis, door knocking to make sure they're safe. All those aspects are really important, the practical reliefs of flood work, perhaps. But the emotional and spiritual is also important. In fact, sometimes we can physically recover from a crisis event, a flood, for example, or a fire. But the emotional impact can be very much longer term and long after the home is renewed or repaired. The impact of the flood or the fire or whatever the event is can continue for a long time.
You're listening to A Christian Response on TWR-UK with me, Dave Piper. Over the course of this series, we're taking a look at how Christians are responding to some of the major issues in communities across the UK and around the world. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on the issues we're covering, then please do feel free to email. The email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. You mentioned that you'll be called in by local churches, work alongside them. How important is it to be that kind of partnering with local Christians who are already in the community?
Yeah. What I generally find and what we see across the globe actually is that churches and Christians want to do something, but often they don't have capacity to get involved in the community at the point of need. Churches will open their doors, and certainly here in the UK, we'll put the kettle on and make a cup of tea. And that's absolutely right, and it's a good response. But I think society has moved on, and not everyone would choose to come to a church at a time of crisis. And so the church needs to go out to where the community are, working through their grief. And that's often where people are laying floral tributes, teddy bears, lighting candles. And that's where the churches can be best represented, standing alongside those that are mourning, standing alongside those that are grieving, and being the very presence of Jesus in that terrible situation.
And as we began this conversation, Nigel, you mentioned that originally in the first few years, the rapid response teams had been all about training, and it wasn't until a little bit later that teams were actually taken out to emergencies, disasters that were taking place. I'm presuming that training is still a really key part of what you do.
It is. We offer a number of trainings. So primarily, we offer Sharing Hope in Crisis, which is a course that's designed for church BGEA offer it free to churches, and it's a resource for the church. Actually, it's far more of a discipleship tool than it is a recruitment tool for chaplains. It's for the everyday member of the church, because we all encounter people that are going through tough times. One of my stock sayings is that it doesn't take a disaster for people to be in crisis. And we see that bereavement, loss, the challenge of navigating life these days. And as Christians, I think we are called, Jesus called us to be present in that situation and to bring appropriate care. And so the course delivers aspects of training that look at grief and trauma, some of the clinical understanding of grief and trauma, and how appropriately to care for people that are in those different places of grief, whether it's shock or denial or anger, and what an appropriate response looks like in those very important sections of the process of grief.
And is part of it, is one of the basic building blocks, just local Christians, local churches, becoming aware of how ready they are to respond to anything like this?
Absolutely. I think there are many opportunities for churches to get involved, particularly with the local resilience forums. They have a local risk register. They know what the hazards are in the community, whether it's a flooding or an industrial site, whether it's severe weather-related events, whether it's, I guess, tourism-related for mountain rescue or lowland rescue or the RNLI. And those are all touch points that Christians can be involved in, whether they're involved in the different aspects of the response that takes place, or whether it's a specific chaplaincy or just general care in the community, recognizing that there are those from the community that step up and respond for no other reason than it's the right thing to do and the good thing to do, apart from any faith motivation that there is.
And just talking about the different ways people respond when these things do take place, is it fair to say that actually the lines are a bit blurred? Because we might be responding as Christians from a spiritual standpoint to try and bring that sense of Christ's love into the situation, but we might also be, for instance, a member of the mountain rescue. We might have a friend who's a paramedic or a member of our church who's an on-call doctor. The lines overlap, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. My story is I served as a police officer for 30 years before joining the BGEA ministry full time. And people say, oh, it must be very different now you're a chaplain manager to being a police officer. And my usual response is it's just the same. It is stepping into places of chaos and challenge and pain and grief and trying to bring the presence of Christ. And I did that as an officer. And I do it as a chaplain. So it is just the same. Of course, you can't always name that you are a Christian within that environment, but hopefully that which we carry, the very aroma of Christ, makes a difference to those that we encounter. And I know that there are so many within policing, the emergency services, national health, every sphere of work where Christians carry that unique presence into the everyday challenges of the work environment.
And do you think that being Christians in those settings actually does help us do that job, because we have got God to rely on, we have got Jesus just a prayer away while we're facing these circumstances?
Absolutely. Our worldview is different. We view the world through a different lens. We view it through a lens of hope and the assurance that we are only in this place temporarily. We are strangers, we are aliens, to use that biblical language, and we're just passing through. And we can carry that unique message of hope without sometimes even having to use words. Many times, and I'm sure you and the listeners will have said, oh, you just make such a difference, or you step into an environment and think there's something different about this place. And I think it's that very presence of Christ, that incarnational presence that we carry, that does make that difference. And exactly to your point, it doesn't matter what role you are doing, you do it in the name of Christ, and it does make a difference.
You're listening to A Christian Response on TWR-UK with me, Dave Piper. Over the course of this series, we're taking a look at how Christians are responding to to some of the major issues in communities across the UK and around the world. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on the issues we're covering, then please do feel free to email. The email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. Nigel, we've mentioned already the two different sides to the work, whether it's disaster response or whether it's responding to personal crises. Could you, to some extent, say that a personal crisis that someone is going through, in some ways they need support of people around them even more because they haven't got the rest of the community going through it with them?
Yeah, certainly within my own faith journey, having those that we can call upon, whether it is a church leader, a small group, a cell group, those that we are in relationship with and accountable to, is really important. Appropriate sharing of where we are, often modelling some level of vulnerability. It's really important. And as we model that, we see others become more comfortable with sharing the challenges where we are. I think sometimes the very British stiff upper lip nature permeates the church and we keep our challenges to ourselves. Whereas actually, if we share where we are, the challenges that we face, the difficulties, the faith questions, we can actually help people navigate that journey of whatever circumstance they find themselves in.
When we look at things that do affect an entire community then, whether that be flooding, extreme weather, whether it be a terror attack or the Ralmote incident you were talking about in West Cumbria going back a few years now, is it important to remember, to remind ourselves that actually, whilst the situation might be resolved, in inverted commas, it could take a long, long time for a community to actually recover from what's happened?
Yes, absolutely. The news cycle moves on, and often it fades from the everyday person's memory. But for those that have been impacted by the event, the challenge of the event, the emotions that are associated with it, they last for a long time. First anniversaries are always significant, fifth anniversaries, and specifically if there is an event that takes place. For example, our team went across to Switzerland and the Crans-Montana fire on New Year's Day. For every Christmas and every New Year period, that will always be in the minds of that community, those who lost loved ones, those who were injured, and it brings an additional weight to the anniversary of the event as well.
And is that again where the local church, on the one hand, can also step up, but at the same time needs to look after its own well-being as well, because they're part of that community? But can they be that long-term presence that really does make a difference over the years?
Yeah, I think as we all would do, if we have a friend or a family member that loses a loved one or is impacted by an event, hopefully we would remember that it's the anniversary and it may be a difficult day for them. And I think that's exactly the same within the church family to recognise that. Our deployment to the Grenfell and Latimer Community Church, we are still in contact with them occasionally, but in the early years following the disaster, we were there at the first anniversary. We were there at the publication of some of the reports. It's important that people can realise that they are not forgotten, that they are remembered. And for everyone else, life does move on. But just recognising that day is significant for them can be really helpful to let them know that they're not facing that day alone.
You mentioned Grenfell, and one's mind goes to Hillsborough as well. Any of these disasters where it has kept coming back into the news cycle, where there's been inquiries, where there's been investigations, announcements and pronouncements made, does that make it almost more difficult to deal with in some ways, difficult to get to grips with when it does keep coming back for those who've suffered so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a reminder, and it will take people back right to the day of the event for those that have been directly impacted by it, or the emergency services that responded, or the NHS that set up a crisis sort of response to it. Absolutely. Those news articles, in some ways can be helpful. It reminds people that this tragedy happened and lessons have been learned and justice is being worked out. But at the same time, it is very difficult to deal with. I remember as I worked within the police environment, family liaison work was one of my specialist roles. And the judicial process is sometimes very slow. And I remember families often sharing that when it was mentioned in the news or I reached out to contact them saying there was a court case coming up, it brought them right back to the time that perhaps I knocked on the door or another officer knocked on the door to give them the challenging news. It is so impactful to their memories and their processing of the grief. And it is often only when there is some kind of closure through a court case or through counselling perhaps, or an understanding of where people are at, that actually people begin to move on and the grief changes within their life.
And of course, as we talk about this, we're not solely talking about the impact on ordinary members of society, are we, in these communities? Because you've mentioned a few times now the emergency responders, the NHS, that sort of thing, because they are human beings as well, and they have the same potential, presumably, to be traumatised by these events.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to consider that, a police officer, a member of A&E staff, they wear the uniform and they put it on. We don't know whether it's their second day or their fifth day or their fifth year, or they may associate the challenge that they're working through because there's some personal resemblance from the person that they're treating or dealing with. All those things can be impactful for those that are working through that crisis event. My own story is that, absolutely, it is hard sometimes. You can face a lifetime of policing and there will be one thing, one job, one aspect that will be a trigger and will perhaps be significant for years or longer in working through the impact of that event.
You're listening to A Christian Response on TWR-UK with me, Dave Piper. Over the course of this series, we're taking a look at how Christians are responding to some of the major issues in communities across the UK and around the world. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on the issues we're covering, the email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. This brings it right back to us in our churches, wherever we are in the UK, doesn't it? Because whilst we may not and hopefully won't be going through disasters and emergencies right now, there could be people in our community, even in our congregation, where what you've just been speaking about is the case for them.
Yeah. We know that life is challenging. The news cycle is challenging. Where we are as a nation with all the political changes, it's a unique season that we're in, and the church isn't immune from that. We are impacted by it as anyone else is, and I hope that the church as a whole is able to respond and take care and recognise that these things are significant, that we can't always leave aside the challenges of the world when we walk through the church doors on a Sunday, and an appropriate response is to take care of people that are finding life difficult and to help them explore responses to the environment that they find themselves in.
Nigel, you mentioned that a lot of the work you do is not recruiting for the rapid response team, but you must recruit at times. What sort of people join a rapid response team, and what would motivate them to want to?
We have all sorts of people, retired police officers, retired GPs. We have people that are already active in other chaplain ministries. And I think generally a pastoral heart, good listeners who want to come alongside people that don't think they have to bring an answer, but can take the time to listen and listen well, and have the awareness of where to signpost to mental health services or addiction services or whatever it may be. I think those are the key aspects that we look for in those who want to join the chaplain ministry.
And for the rest of us, of course, as I've said before, we would hope and pray that we wouldn't have to face community or national disasters in our churches. It may happen. We'd hope and pray that we wouldn't have to face personal crises. Again, that may happen. We're not promised an easy life when we become Christians. But is there merit, is there value, do you think, in thoughts and prayers if it's Christians actually taking that seriously?
Yeah. I know as we in the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association Rapid Response Team, we pray on a Monday evening, every Monday. Many of our prayers are related to the chaplains and their lives and what they're going through. But I would say a good 80% of the time, we are praying into those things that are featuring in the news, those things that are impacting society. We're asking Father God to be present through those he puts in those situations, the emergency services, perhaps other chaplain teams in different parts of the world, perhaps Samaritan's Purse as they respond to a crisis event in Cambodia or wherever. We recognise that prayer does make a difference. It does change the environment that we are in. And yes, it is absolutely appropriate for churches to pray into those situations, for godly people to be there, to bring that hope, to bring the uniqueness of the message that we carry by the presence of those Christians in that environment.
Nigel, for anyone who's listening who is either a church leader themselves or thinks their church leader might be interested in finding out more, what is the best way to find out more about the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association here in the UK, the rapid response teams, and of course the training that is on offer?
Yeah, I'd simply go to billygraham.org.uk and look on the links for what we do, and you'll find the different ministries there, including the rapid response team. And you can see on that webpage a link to Sharing Hope in Crisis, which is the name of our training. And that is a free course offered to churches, and as I say, it's designed as a discipleship course rather than a recruitment tool. So hopefully it leaves the church in a better place. But we often find maybe out of a group of 30, there would perhaps be 2 or 3 people who actually think, I could do that as a ministry, as a chaplain ministry. And I'd encourage people just to check out the website and see what volunteering opportunities are available.
Nigel Fawcett-Jones, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And that's all we've got time for on this week's episode of A Christian Response. I'm Dave Piper, and it's been a pleasure to have your company over the past half hour as we've taken a closer look at how Christians are responding and can respond to the major issues in life, whether that's in our own towns and cities, across the nations of the UK, or even reaching out into the wider world. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on the issues we're discussing, then please do feel free to email. The email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. And you can stream or download this week's episode now in full at the website. Just go to twr.org.uk/on-demand and search for A Christian Response.
This podcast is a production of Transworld Radio UK. For more information, go to our website at twr.org.uk.